it's kind of hard to understand what happened to this place because it's still standing. Once you learn a little bit more about the history that's under your feet, you wonder why it wasn't completely wiped off the map. Day 3 in Seward, and we're actually going to do 2 sketches. And if you want to just do one of them, you can skip ahead and sketch this wild chaoticness. But right now, I'm going to sketch a little bit of something that is just a bit more in line with present day, that lines up with these 3. So we've got the kind of seascape, we've got Mount Marathon, and then we're going to sketch this really interesting little spot on the beach where you have these pylons kind of going back into the distance that kind of hide an interesting story about one of Seward's most kind of chaotic, wild, and potentially harrowing days this place has ever seen. So I'm going to jump right into it. I might leave these 2 right here just so I can kind of get a sense on what could kind of fit in right there. But like the others, it's going to start with some real simple basics, a little bit of yellow, and then that blue up in the sky. So I'll just add a tiny bit of yellow right here. I'm not worrying too much about those mountains. If I get any there, that's fine. I'm just going to add a little bit this time because there's so much sky. And then a lot of this blue, cerulean blue. This is finally getting into some of the maybe not recent, because Seward has been, through some wild history, but we're going to be talking about the 1964 earthquake and the stories and kind of the dramatic happenings in and around Seward, which you really can't always see when you are actually there in person. You're literally like walking over and around and in history, but even though I visited tons of times, I had almost no idea what I was walking through, which is kind of wild. Okay, got some good blue there. Now I'm going to add just that water right in between the 2 of them, letting them kind of do their own mixing without getting too green. I'm definitely going to get it eventually. If the first couple skies haven't quite worked out, that's okay. You've got some time. We have 3 whole more paintings we're working on. So I've got all this sky, I've got these little pilings with this kind of fun cross section. So I'm going to add in those pilings right now, and then we'll kind of paint around them later on. Kind of literally talking about the history. And later on, we will get into what was there almost, well, let's see, 1964, decades and decades ago. Math is not my strong suit, but that's kind of fun because when you paint, you don't really need too much of it. So I'm adding some of those little pylons kind of hidden in the ground. Actually, when you're walking over this stuff, you probably are walking over lots of stuff that's kind of been buried there, which is kind of wild to think about. But it also reminds me too of just like physically, it's like our brains would explode if we actually knew everything that was around us, if we actually understood and saw it. But it's just a good reminder that there is history and amazing stuff all over the place, even in your own backyard. You just have to kind of search it out sometimes. That being said, Alaska is pretty incredible, and the amount of wild craziness in your backyard is just way higher when you are here. But it's worth paying attention. Alright, a couple of these little tiny logs right here, and then these right here, you can make rocks, or you can make just other stuff. I might maybe add a little bit of blue to make them kind of a piece of house or something like that, maybe. Maybe this one's a piece of boat. Might even make one of these maybe yellowish or something. And that's because a lot of the tsunami and the earthquake that affected this area really just kind of pushed debris all over the place. So there's been an amazing job of kind of cleaning a lot of it up, but just the scope of the pieces and things around are really interesting just to imagine. Okay, we got some of those, and then maybe just a couple little rocks or something, kind of like what we've done in the past. By the end of this series, you are going to get really, 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 really good at doing like this half-painted rocks that you uncover with your paintings later on. It's kind of fun to see them kind of all slowly come to life. Okay, so we got all of those. That is looking great. Next, I'm going to add a little bit of the ocean here. So I'm going to add the ocean, and then I'll add the pilings on top. That way I don't have to like paint around each of them individually. So here's a little bit of that same blue, kind of reflecting from what the sky is. We're going to just sketch this amazing little body of water. what you're looking at right back here, all this stuff, that is the KMTA heritage area. So that is kind of that transportation corridor, that layer and layer and layer of history and just that really incredible area of what everything means. So Seward kind of is the gateway there if you're going from this side, and it's just kind of interesting that right at the mouth this kind of giant calamity happened. All right, a little bit right there. Just kind of waiting for everything to dry. It's really just this is waiting for those moments and the right timing. While that's drying, why don't we work a little bit on this camper van up here. I'm just gonna add a tiny bit of blue right to maybe one side. Doesn't take much, but it's much easier to do this now than it is later. And this is kind of on the beach where there's this campground. This whole area used to be something very, very, very different, but right now it's a lovely walk when you're kind of going down there. It's honestly, especially around like 4th of July and those times, it's just one of the most peaceful spots out there, which is funny because it was so not a couple decades ago. There we go, a little bit there. And now let's start painting in this kind of waterfront. The rocks are honestly pretty gray, but I'm going to try to match whatever kind of colors I have over here just to kind of make sure it all sticks together. So in that case, it's going to be a bit of brown, and then I'll probably add some blue on top of that. Okay, ooh, way too much, but that's okay. Don't panic. Worst case scenario, you just have to make a fun painting again, but usually it's not nearly as dark as you think it is, because watercolor will dry lighter than it goes on. So if you add maybe a little bit of blue or something in there, you're going to get that gray color. You can also mix it on the palette if you prefer instead. Or if you just have a gray, go for it. Just adding a little bit there. And then we're going to add in the rest of that color of that cross section a bit later. Perfect. If you want to go all the way to the water, you can, but I'm probably going to go a little bit later and just add some slightly darker colors. But you can also check to see if it's dry. Mine is not quite yet. Okay, this is looking really, really great. Now, like I said, this is a double, so I am just moving through this one relatively fast because I think the next one is the real wildness. So let's jump right into these mountains here, and then we'll kind of work our way down to these. So these mountains, I'm going to kind of go sort of light blue and then to some more color. It's called atmospheric distillation, if you want the real fancy term. Basically just means that the further away something is, the more blue and the lighter it gets. And there's a lot of room for that with these mountains here in this area. So we got a little bit of blue, not too much, just like that. And boom, 1 of 3, good to go. Really doesn't take too much thought on that one. In fact, we could probably even start this next one, and by the time it's there, it's all to be dry. Just a little bit more blue this time, using some of that kind of ultramarine blue. And just a little bit, just like that. Even if these two connect, that is totally fine. I had like a little spit of land there, but if that gets caught up and turned into mountains, that's okay as well. And boom, there's our second one right there. Like I said, look at that. Basically already dry. And I'll just wait for that third one, just until that's fully dry. Okay, great. So next, let's add a little bit of these kind of underground areas. We'll come back in and do all these details in the middle. We'll kind of Goldilocks it, go to the extremes and then the middle. So that's going to be just like we did earlier. It's going to be brown on the top and then kind of purple and then that dark indigo. So here comes kind of some delicate little brushwork, but don't worry, you can't get this too wrong. Just a little bit up here. Kind of carving out some of those watercolors, but also moving fast enough that you can still kind of mix those colors together. Don't worry too much if you're not getting it perfect. This is kind of a fun series because the real kind of cross-section effect is just going to get stronger as you add these together. So if it's totally messy and a little bit all over the place, you honestly won't be able to tell too much, especially toward the end. So you really just gotta find your own rhythm. My favorite part of watercolors, especially when I'm doing in the field is those little pressures that kind of force you to be a little quicker, maybe be a little bit looser, like if there's snow falling or rain coming, or maybe you're hiking to somebody who's not quite willing to stand outside and make a sketch quite as long. But it's so easy in the studio just to kind of sit and really focus on one little thing. But instead we're just going to rush through, moving to the purple now, and slowly filling in this big kind of underground section of what is being hidden. This is modern day Seward, by the way. We will be sketching 1964, or perhaps even 1964 and one day later, but this is kind of what you're going to see today on this beach. Piece by piece, brushstroke by brushstroke, this is coming lovely together. If you stuck with it this far, you're doing great. This is not the easiest paintings to do. I often find that especially these landscapes in Alaska can be so complex because there's just so much going on in every frame. And actually some of the hardest part is just finding one thing to focus on. You know, even just the animals alone in any given landscape could be a whole painting series on their own, let alone just a single sketch. So the hardest part is often just finding one thing to pick and just simplify it down. Adding a little bit of my blue here. Working down real quickly actually at this point, just piece by piece. And then we're going to go to indigo right at the end. The reason I've got this other little sketch right there is just so I can kind of see how those colors fit in. It's really fun when you kind of have these trail tiles all kind of connect. I used to feel like I needed to paint on giant sheets of paper to actually do anything, but lately I've just been really enjoying these small little sketches, which are just a bit more unassuming, and then adding them together to make some really interesting kind of bigger pieces, which is really sort of like the history of some of these places. You know, it wasn't just one big earthquake or one race or something like that. It's like stone soup. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these little tiny stories and experiences and perspectives, and that's what makes these spots up, which is kind of why it's so worth visiting, because you just don't get a sense of that from books or movies or anything really, like anything but that in-person experience. Okay, wow, that was a fast one. So you're just catching up. We got the brown, purple, blue, and then indigo, and there's kind of our little bit of a cross section. If you want to be extra fancy, you can just add a touch of indigo right to the top, just where that initial cross section happens. Basically, we took a big old slice out of Seward. And now, as we kind of work our way back up, let us jump right into a few of these other little details. If you want, you can kind of spatter a little bit in. Take some blues or some purples and just flick them in right there on the beach, those little rocks. Or you can just paint them in individually. That is totally fair game as well. If you want to add in just a couple of those little tiny rocks, that's an easy way to do it. And then we're going to add these pilings. Now there's one little section that you'll notice where we have missed. We're waiting for this to dry out. This little bit underwater, we will be adding some, but right now, let's add these pilings on top. So that's a little bit of our brown right here. And make sure these first ones are nice and light. So these ones that are just in front, the ones behind will make a little darker, just because it kind of brings things out. Also, it differentiates the two of them. But the ones in front, definitely making a little bit lighter. Let's get some on here now. No super wrong answers, but this does make it just a little easier. There we go, a couple pilings just like that, piece by piece. We will come back into that kind of ocean front where it's a little darker too, don't worry. I haven't forgotten about it. And now that those are drying, we can't really add those back pieces in. Let's add some of this water, assuming this edge is nice and dry. So I'm thinking probably just a nice dark blue, something like this. Because we kind of added those little sections in earlier, this is when it kind of comes to life. Watch this right here. Boom. How fun is that? I just love when like those big pieces of watercolor kind of slot into place. People talk about, you know, satisfying things like the final piece of a puzzle, but with watercolors, I feel like it's constantly, you're just constantly adding in those final puzzle pieces. There we go. See, so now we kind of got that cross section with that feel. That's great. Okay. A little bit of that, a little bit of this. That right there is still super wet, so I might just add a little bit of paper towel. Doesn't take much, but I'll just kind of more or less dry that area right off. If you have more patience, or maybe you live in a drier climate, it's not going to affect you too much. But there we go. Lovely gradient now. And it's almost time to add this final mountain right here, assuming everything gets dry as well. And with this one, we're going to add color on the top and then a little bit of light water down there to kind of bring it in. Watch out that you don't get your hand too much in this paint. That's a pretty common thing that often happens to me. But let's just add a little bit of probably some blue, maybe a little bit of purple. A little bit of blue right there. Just going up. And then we're going to add a little bit of purple. Purple is one of those totally underrated colors. There's not a lot of actual purple things in life, but also everything is a little bit purple at some point in that light. A little bit of purple right there. And then comes just some basic water. Nice, easy, fluid right there. Letting it all soak together. Giving us a really cool look. That is looking great so far. Awesome work. Kind of just bouncing around. It's a bit like playing 2 or 3 or 4 games of chess at once. While I'm at it, I saw it might be a little nice to have a couple more little brown rocks or something in there. A lot of blue, get a little bit brown, and the further away you go, the smaller they get, so you can add as many as you want, just kind of follow those principles. And finally, let's add it just a couple little details like that bush before everything else is dry enough for us to really finish it off. So a little bit of a green bush, something just like that, right there. But while we have the moment, let's quickly add just a little bit. There's a bit of burnt sienna. I'm going to just kind of fill in this little section of beach right here. You could also use green if you'd prefer. They are both good. This is kind of where the cruise boats dock down there. Old airport. Well, the only airport actually. It's the old and the new airport. And that kind of start of the KMTA area. And then let's add in that little section right there with the mountains. A little bit of green. Adding a little bit right there, and just a touch of blue, just to kind of bring it full circle. Looks like I made my RV a little bit too blue. It's kind of hiding in the mountains, but that's okay. I know it's there. Maybe even a touch of blue right down here. Okay, that's looking great. There's only a couple little things we have to finish here. One of them is this little section of beach as it kind of cruises by. I'm saving that to be a little darker. So here's a bit of brown. And the reason is as those waves lap up, it just kind of gets the rocks wet, which makes them a little darker. So it's just a nice way to kind of bring that realism in. A little bit of purple perhaps, just in there a little bit, and then use that water. Just like that. Easy, simple. And totally unnecessary. If you're not feeling it, don't bother. This is really just like a serving suggestion of art. Maybe I'll even add a tiny bit of indigo. Who knows? Going crazy. Okay, that's too much. A little too crazy. Okay, so once we have a bunch of that, let's add in the rest of these pilings. Sorry if they're just pure indigo. You could also make them purple. You can make them blue. Whatever's just darker than brown. Adding a few back there. We're actually going to end up painting a lot more of these in the old sketch as well, which is kind of wild. Okay, and there's that. The last little bit is just a couple of these shapes. So we got our little person up there. Let's see a little hillside too, I forgot that. Adding those in. Little person up there, I'm just going to add a little cast shadow for them. Just a little something like that. Same with this piling, maybe here. A little cast shadow, kind of up by these rail ties. And then around these, maybe I'll add just a tiny bit of a little ripples. Try out something like this. But if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. Don't feel the need. And there you have it. It was fast, it was kind of simple, but it's fun how you can kind of see just how they're all kind of fitting together right now. But the real wildness that I want to sketch is right here. And first, let's just go over a few tsunami facts, because it's almost hard to imagine the scale of this thing. On March 27th, 1964, at 5:36 p.m., one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded in human history took place in the northern part of Prince William Sound. You might be wondering, how do they know this stuff? There's not a whole lot of people there, and there's not a geology station, right there. But it was so big, this earthquake registered all over the world. In fact, a lot of the deaths from the tsunami happened in California and Oregon on those coastlines. So deep down underneath the water, all of this built up pressure in the Earth's crust just got released, sending huge amounts of rock just skyrocketing up under the water. And what it did is it displaced all of that water, which had to go find somewhere else to be. And that creates what you call a tsunami. So all over the KMTA corridor, these towns and outposts and villages and cities just got rocked by one of the most extreme earthquakes on Earth. But 25 minutes from then, this huge wall of rushing water was about to hit these places that were just getting back to their feet. The earthquake itself practically leveled Anchorage, and some of the other places that were most affected were Whittier, Valdez, and of course, Seward. In fact, in Valdez, one of the waves was recorded at reaching about 170 feet. So you can imagine this tremendous amount of water and energy heading towards Seward, which is actually at that point on fire because the earthquake had ruptured lines and buildings were on fire and tankers and train cars. The shore actually probably looked like it was going out, almost like a low tide was happening just before the water rushed in, almost being funneled by all of the mountains. There would have been no stopping it, and would have treated trains and boats and people like bath toys. Right to think that it was a pretty rough day for the KMTA corridor, and the rest of Alaska, frankly, and California and Oregon. But it's what happened after all of that that was so surprising to a lot of people. And so that's the scene that we find ourselves in, not the placid, easy campground that you might see today. So we're going to jump into that moment and sketch those moments after the tsunami. So here's what we just sketched, something that fits pretty well into the landscape. And right now, this is what I want to paint. And you might be thinking, how on earth are these two related? I mean, they look totally different. But that's because in 1964, Seward basically got turned upside down by a 9.2 earthquake. And we're going to sketch this area right here just moments after that happened. So I'm going to actually put these two side by side. We're going to move present day right out of the way because this is the comparison we're looking at. Just for a little bit of pointers, we've still got the same mountains. We've still got, these are kind of some good landscapes. These two little pilings are apparently in this exact same spot. But right here are plumes of smoke from a town that is on fire. This is not a submarine. This is actually a train car. This used to be basically the train side of things, which all got kind of washed away. This is the water level at this point now of some of that kind of coming through. And then way up here we still have a similar shore, but it's not a campground anymore. It is a town kind of in ruins. So it's a little bit dark, a little bit scary, but also just a really wild thing for a town to be hit by a 9.2 earthquake, but then come together stronger after it. So let's dive right in, or in this case kind of wade, and start to paint this wild event. Okay, so I'm going to start with the same sky, kind of. There's only little pieces that you can kind of see through it here. You can kind of see this is where one mountain was. I'm just adding a bit of yellow, and there is kind of the second. So just adding a little bit of that sky in there as these kind of plumes of smoke take over. Oh, sorry, I even messed it up here. Already a little tough to see. A little bit right there. That's okay because it was kind of black acrid smoke. The photos are ridiculous. What that means for us in watercolor is basically whatever you paint, we will be covering it up with black acrid smoke, so don't worry about getting it too right. There we go. A little bit of the sky, even a normal sunrise kind of came up over the town. Okay, and then what we're going to paint next is this kind of wild, just almost submarine looking rail car. This one would have been a bit kind of yellow and brown, so we're going to add just a little bit of that in here. Now for a lot of people kind of picking through the wreckage, this was sort of a double whammy. What happened first was the earthquake, and then the tsunami was triggered after that, or because of it. And so this is kind of after both of those. And a little bit of that brown now in here. Our yellow and then our brown. Ooh, looks like I got some other colors in there. That's alright, everything here also got kind of all mixed up. A little bit more of that yellow. Just like that. We're going to be adding a couple more colors in here. Everything here is going to be below water, so we're kind of painting above the water line at this point. Maybe even adding in our pilings right now. Now the interesting story about this dock is that there was an insurance claim made after the event. Sketching a little bit more of that right here. So there's this insurance made after the event about, I'm not sure if it was this dock or one of the other ones, but basically they had one insurance and not the other. So there's this actual scale model of this entire area that was built to try to show how an earthquake or not an earthquake would have destroyed it, because one side is arguing that the dock was destroyed by the earthquake and the other side is arguing that it was already destroyed and that when the tsunami rolled in, it wasn't really doing any more damage than had already been done. Can't remember who won, but it's wild to be arguing over those things. You know, it's almost like which came first, the chicken or the egg, which got destroyed first by the tsunami or by the earthquake. Okay, a little bit of that right there, and then these kind of logs below, we're gonna make maybe a more purpley brown. So just kind of add a little bit of kind of ocean color to whatever you're doing, and that'll work just fine. So adding a little bit to these right now. So what was so impactful about kind of this tsunami is the fact that you had this massive earthquake, just a 9.2, which when you put it on the Richter scale is just unfathomable. Alaska is on the Ring of Fire, which is kind of this tectonic plate. If you look at it, all the places that get the big earthquakes, Japan, Iceland, you know, a lot of Alaska is along this Ring of Fire, and a 9.2 is not a common thing. It's a huge earthquake, and so this massive earthquake, and actually basically the town got set on fire. There's all of these huge fires by the oil drums, which are kind of by the town. There's like the town itself is on fire, and then the tsunami came. Speaking of which, let's get some of this fire, or at least this smoke going right now. We've got this one, and it looks like most of these are dry for me. So let's start with maybe this one right here. Big plume of smoke, and the way I'm going to do it is actually, I'm going to kind of create some little billows, and these plumes of smoke are going to be much darker behind it, so I need a little bit of lightness. It's a strange thing to learn how to paint. Unfortunately, the wildfires going on now, it's much more common for a lot of people, but this is not a wildfire fire. This is not yellowish. It's dark. It's really acrid. This is indigo going on right here. And I'm just gonna kind of make a few shapes. Maybe something like this, maybe something like that. Kind of different billows, because it's not one uniform anything. So you kind of just make a couple shapes like this, and then you add water in between them and let that watercolor do its thing. So there we go. A couple little shapes, adding some water now, and then just kind of leaving it alone. And it's gonna kind of swirl and move, and you're just kind of relying on, you know, the standard watercoloriness to sort of do its job. This is one of those areas where I feel like it often works really well. Okay, so just a little bit more up here, and then just a touch right over there. Perfect. A little bit more. And then we're going to do something kind of similar right here. We've got another kind of big billowing patch of smoke. So a little bit of that indigo, or in this case a lot of that indigo. Just kind of make a few shapes, whatever feels good and normal. And then add in a little bit of this right there. Piece by piece, the town kind of put together what was going on. But it's hard. You'll see in Seward there's a lot of tsunami evacuation signs. But could you imagine suffering one massive natural disaster and thinking, oh, I need to go find my family, check on these things, see what's going on, only to realize like that the next, adding a bit more black here, indigo, but like not even realize that like the next potentially even bigger natural disaster was on its way towards you in the form of a massive tidal wave. Okay, there we go. So a little bit of smoke. We will be adding a little bit more there, but why don't we add some of these mountains in right now? Not indigo, but maybe a little bit of blue. If you already painted them beforehand, you kind of know the drill. A little bit of blue on top, and then we'll just add some water in. Kind of let them all mix together. Simple, but quick. There we go. KMTA corridor. Right in the distance. And one thing I kind of forgot in my little train, got to add that in, is this interesting little cap. Kind of makes it feel very submarine-y. But things have actually been kind of wholly diverted since that point. So even though you can kind of feel things like in here, you can tell like the rail car connection. Right now, that is not where it came from because they kind of had to rebuild a lot of this. Because what happened is the tsunami, which had triggered not, in Seward, but kind of outside, sent all of this water and it just funneled into the bay and just really, really worked its way and kind of almost like a sloshing bathtub just went back and forth and did a whole lot of damage to really this relatively small but also really influential and consequential space. Okay, so got a little bit there, a little bit here. Let's add in just a little bit of, if it's dry, a little bit of this section. We'll add some of that water in. So for this spot, I'm going to add probably just a little bit of blue. Just a little something here. You can kind of see that water being pushed in, almost like the highest tide you could imagine. But, tsunamis don't just break. I mean, the power of water is amazing. Which is interesting, because sometimes you can use it for, things like watercolor. And just like, it's so simple, but also just hard to even fathom the scale of what was going on there. A little bit of that blue right in here. And a little bit more just to fill out the full train car. The photos are pretty wild. It looks like a toddler had a temper tantrum with a model town. That's kind of the scope. While you're waiting too, you can kind of see there's some cool kind of effects going on with this little smoke plume. You can also add just like a drop, literally a drop of water, just something like that. And slowly it'll kind of spread out. I'll try one right here. You don't want to overdo it, but it's kind of a cool effect. So I'll wait for a little, a minute, 2 minutes, and then that will really kind of move around. You don't want to overdo that one at all. Okay, so we got most of those, just kind of working our way through this puzzle. Let's add in some wheels perhaps, a little bit of brown or something. Yeah, something kind of like that. You could also use indigo. And we'll come back in there in a second with some kind of dirt. Adding a bit more. There's some of those wheels. Let's fill in some of these pieces. Maybe some of that yellow. We painted things kind of backwards, so now you can kind of see where these pylons stood. They were right here. They were part of this big dock, this sort of train connection. But it's wild to think that a lot of them are still standing and had experienced this. You just see them as a spot to skip rocks near or a spot where the otters were, but actually This had like deep history, and it's really the same for the whole Kenai Mountain-Turnagain area. That's what heritage area means. It's got history, and this is relatively recent history compared to the area. Okay, that's looking great. Maybe we work on this little boat right here. I just had to sneak a little boat in. I'm not sure if there were any little boats that made it all the way here, but back there in the small boat harbor at the time, they were just strewn everywhere, just on, next to houses, on roads, on top of cars. So I'm just gonna put a little one in here. That's the thing with art, you can kind of paint how it would have felt, maybe not exactly how it looked. A little bit there, a little bit here. If there's any areas that are a little too wet, you can always come in with a bit of paper towel. Okay. If you stuck with me this long, you're doing great. This is a chaotic thing to paint. So good work so far. Let's keep it going. Just a couple more things to sketch here. Perhaps even up here, got a little bit of like a container in the ocean. Maybe we make that, I started blue, but maybe we just leave it mostly white. Just a touch of blue, something like that. You can even paint the other side a bit darker if you want to add that shadow in. Just kind of adding things in piece by piece. Oh no. And if it's too wet, it'll kind of bleed all over the place. But like I said, it's kind of the big picture we're looking for. So if it's a little messy, that's totally fine. And then I think I'm going to paint in just this last little bit of a oil drum kind of a thing right up here. And then I'm going to let all this dry for just a minute or two, just so I can add those last details and really kind of pull it together. So here we go. I'm gonna wait just about a minute. Alright, much more dry. Well, all things considered. So time to add just the last few little things. One being these purple mountains I kind of forgot about. For some reason, painting kind of chaotic things makes me feel a little scattered, especially when they're this complex. So right here, kind of had the same mountains. This wouldn't change too much, although there were reports of avalanches coming down Mount Marathon. So that whole area, just imagine a giant sort of shaking that whole area. That really would have kind of thrown everything for a bit of a loop. Not a time you'd want to be on that mountain, that's for sure. There we go. A little bit that purple mountain right there, and then maybe just a tiny bit of brown just right along that coast, which would have been getting battered by waves at this point. A little bit right there. We'll come back to that in a second. Now let's add in just some of the rest of what's going on down here. Just kind of a mix of indigo and brown, and kind of just finding your way around. A little bit of brown down here, just shapes on shapes on shapes. We'll come back in and fill in basically anything that's left here in just a moment as well. A little bit of blue in there. There we go. I think for me, one of the coolest things about Alaska is the scale. Just, we've got bigger moose, we've got more land, even the natural disasters seem like they pack an extra big punch. But what's so cool is, even though there's this massive scale and the populations are so small, like the way that people would come together, and the way that people came together during the tsunami, during the earthquake, they actually sent people up just because they thought that things were going to go so badly. They wanted to study kind of how like civilization collapses, more or less. Actually sent a couple of people, can't remember the agency, but really to see in Anchorage and what happens when there's a massive disaster like this, a 9.2, and they didn't find anything like that. People are helping each other out. People are on the radio, just letting people know it's going to be okay, where they needed to go, who was where. There's amazing what a small community can do. And I think in like times of uncertainty and what feels like disasters, it's those small communities that are really going to come through and really be that light. Even though you can flip an entire town upside down, people are still going to help each other out, and that's just what's so cool. Okay, so speaking of flipping a town upside down, we're almost done with that. Maybe adding a little bit more blue, things like this. Just keeping it all kind of underwater chic, something like that. And then I'm going to add just something kind of dark for the under trestles. This would have been the kind of things that would have gone onto rails, that you might find on and around town. Just these massive train cars. It's also kind of interesting to think how much Seward has changed. It seems like this place that's been around forever, and it has, but like the way and the reason has changed a lot. A couple more little bits. Basically, just make sure nothing is too bright. If it's underwater, it should have a little bit of blue on it, so don't feel afraid to just kind of go like this. Just really just add in a ton of color. Something like that would be totally fine. Now back up to this beach right up here. Maybe a little bit of brown, but we're gonna kind of get stuff pretty dark, painting around our little boat, and maybe some blues, maybe some purples. Watch out for the little cap of your submarine train car there. A couple things right in there like this. And we'll fill in those last plumes of smoke there kind of as one of the last things we do. Just a few right there. Maybe even adding some of that ocean water right here. It might seem super calm today, but just knowing that it can be so tumultuous. A little bit there, a little bit here. Although I do know, if there's a tsunami, there's a lot of evacuation signs. They can get you out of town pretty quick. And finally, these little plumes of smoke from all these fires. So we got a couple mostly in town, but then there'll be a few out of there as well. So we're going to add just just a very dark plume of smoke kind of in the distance. A little bit right here, a little bit right there. Just like that. Kind of getting that darkness behind, because it really kind of gives everything else a little bit of clarity. And one more right here in what is one of the more chaotic paintings I've ever made. Maybe even adding a little bit like there, just to kind of show it going through, all moving in the same direction. And then the last little bit is just adding any little details you think are missing. Maybe a little circle in these wheels. Maybe there's a little shadow that needs to be somewhere. Maybe even up here, we want to add just a little bit of just some darkness to these shapes, kind of the debris. Maybe even just a little bit of those trees. This was more or less in the winter, but there would have been little spots. Some of the trees would have been green. All the pines. And there we go. Kind of a wild comparison between then and now. But I think sometimes it's important to remember that what's right below our feet has often seen things we couldn't even imagine. And it's still there. And even the biggest tsunamis in the world can't really break the spirit of a small town. Breaking